Hello, and welcome to the Creative Playing Podcast Network. Join us as we get to share some great convention panels we were able to attend at CoKoCon 2019 up in Phoenix, Arizona. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Hi, this is Kelly, aka Trixie from Ragnarok and Roll, assigned to Ragnarok Story, and Tilda Wimblewick from D&D Journey of the 5th Edition. First off, I would just like to say thank you to everyone for listening to our varied adventures, as well as for rating us on iTunes and rpgpodcast.com. If you haven't rated us yet, we would greatly appreciate it if you could. And if you're looking for more ways to support our efforts, we are now on Patreon, a great site where you can help us continue making more podcasts, as well as some special surprises for our patrons. If you can, please look us up at www.patreon.com/cppn. Every little bit helps. And again, thank you for listening.
We're going to die. But as long as we can laugh about it. That's humor. Oh, good. We've had tea this morning. Very strong tea. So good. It's called extra strong. And it really was like drinking a Yorkshireman right out of the cup. I just felt like I was transported, and we'd sort of taken a Geordie and sort of turned him into an elixir in the cup. And I was like, oh, I'm going to drink this. We'll see how I sound when we're done. Might not sound like this anymore. I stood up straight, that's for sure. Yes. So good. All right.
Still at 2 minutes.
Oh my gosh. Good. Banter for 3. So, hello, how do you do? You are the new face in the room. Not to put you on the spot, but I just did. Apologies. Not sorry, we're very friendly here. What is your name?
Ray.
Ray, it's very nice to meet you. Are you local to the Phoenix metro area?
Tucson.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, that's where we live. Yes. It's infinitely cooler by 5 degrees.
Infinitely.
So, Ray, what brought you up to CoKoCon?
Chance to get away and geek out.
Excellent.
Get away, cool down.
Get away.
No, just getting away.
Yeah.
There's no cooling down. Did you come last year? Is this your first
This is
year?
my first time.
Oh, as is mine.
Well, welcome.
So lovely.
Glad to have you.
As a matter of fact, I won my tickets at a little thing in Tucson that we call Dickens Tea in December. Yes. If you're interested in a big tea party with lots of fun and friends, highly recommend it.
It is time.
All right, it's time. Time.
Dun dun dun.
So hello, everyone. Would you like to introduce yourself? Shall I repeat last night's performance?
And give my sister
I would prefer to breathe. So, hello. I am Temperance Everett, and I am, well, a questionable character. But I have been costuming for many, well, suffice to say, many years. And I'm overcome by how talented this lady is, and I am honored that she has asked me to join her on this panel.
Starting out with the compliment duel.
Yes, so I can't partake of the compliment also.
Oh, so you just sneak one in.
Yes, absolutely, because I'm sneaky.
Thank you. So good. I'm overcome. So, I am Madame Askew. We're all going to die. That's what we hear about. Yes. So, my name is Madame Askew. I even remembered to my card. So exciting. I'm notorious for forgetting these and forgetting to introduce myself. And I'm just like, oh, we met. And people are like, no, I mean, we were in the room with you, but who are you? So, I'm very happy to be here with you, lovely people, at this early morning on a Saturday at Con. Thank you for rolling out of your boudoirs to join us to talk about death.
Yes,
So good.
rather than death in the morning rather than death in the afternoon.
Yeah.
One of our favorite cocktails.
So I have been sewing for a long time. I'm self-taught. I've been costuming in a more formal capacity for the last sort of 20-ish years. Temperance actually has much more formal training than I.
I was self-taught too initially, but yes.
Yeah, no.
But then I did work in a professional costume shop for a while.
She's so modest, I have to remind her of these things. But we do a lot of work together in Tucson. We work frequently in the workshop of Doom together, so we're grand collaborators.
Yes.
And we have a passion for Victoriana, which we express through steampunk fashion. Often when we are at panels talking about costuming, something will come up and someone will say something that's sort of like, did people, die of like X, Y, or Z? And we're like, well, no, but they did die from, die X, or they died from that time the billiard balls exploded, or they caught on fire and went up like Roman candles. So we thought it might be fun to actually put together a panel just about the death, rather than teasing you with the death during other panels and then just saying, oh, but we can't get into that because we have to get back into the really engrossing details about how we stitch the scene. No one wants to know about death. That's not interesting.
And we have a passion for history
Yes,
as
we
well.
do.
So we thought, let's combine these lovely humorous anecdotes of people dying into one full panel.
So here we are.
Yes.
To torture to help all of you. With
Enlighten.
Yeah, enlighten.
Enlighten.
Oh, that's a good verb. Mm-hmm. So, there were many ways to die by fashion in the Victorian era. One of them was not being crushed to death by your corset. I just like to get that out of the way. And also, as a note, people were not having ribs removed and also dying from that process. Because elective surgery was not a thing in the 19th century. In fact, they really tried to avoid that altogether because you were likely to die. So,
Everything was out to get you. It's not just paranoia.
the interesting thing about the 19th century is how many people actually lived,
Yes.
rather than the ways they died.
Well,
It's
it helped that they
always-
tried to have as many children as possible.
Well, I mean, I think that was part of it.
A war of attrition.
Right, they're like, well, we better have 10 because we've got 20% survival rate. I don't think that's actually an exaggeration.
And especially if you're living in London where the smoke was...
Right, oh, the air quality is
Yes.
so good.
There was no air, there was only smoke. It was soot.
Soot. So there was a lot of a kind of death and destruction and maiming that happened just with the sorts of industrial practices of the 19th and 18th century that were not friendly to things like keeping all your fingers or not being poisoned or not being irradiated and turned into like a match yourself.
Or filling your lungs with cotton fibers because the gins were.
Oh yeah. Oh, the cotton lung.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Another death by fabric.
another death by fabric. Well, that's
It's just in the process of making the fabric.
Well, that's the thing. The people who died the most from fabric were actually the people producing it. So, because these processes were often so toxic and there was no OSHA in place to protect people from safety hazards at the workplace, the masters, the owners were like, well, we know that if you get this into your person, it is arsenic. And so, of course, there's this whole thing where you will be poisoned to death slowly over the next 9 months. But we are going to pay you like 5 pence a day, so...
Enjoy.
Right. And arsenic is a prime culprit. So, in the dyeing process...
Let's clarify. D-Y-E, not D-I-I-E. But when you say dying process, you meant the D-Y-E.
I did mean the D-Y-E and not the D-I-E, although we will get to that, yeah.
One leads to the other.
So, yes. So you may or may not, obviously, that's a Schrodinger's box sort of statement, you may be familiar with sort of that beautiful emerald green or the bright greens that you see in the earlier part of the 19th century, sort of 1850s, 1840s, and but especially the 1850s, and as we're getting into those big full skirts, gorgeous, gorgeous green, Schloss green, and or Paris green, by both names. It was very popular, and it turns out that getting a green colour that vibrant is very challenging. So the natural dyes that they had been using before, you'd have to layer a colour like use blue and yellow together in some order to get it green, or you'd get a sort of muddier green that's right out of nature. And so both of those processes were undesirable in that as the two-tone green faded, and it would fade rather quickly, the underlying colour would start to come through and change the shade of your clothes. Or go grey, yeah. And then with the natural sort of greens out of plant materials, you would end up with this muddier tone. And people wanted something vibrant. Those Victorians.
Pop. Something that would that verdant green that just, Yeah,
really wanted eye-bleeding colours. And so a delightful gentleman out of Germany discovered a way to create what he called Schloss green. And it turns out arsenic is a wonderful way of making
the green.
What? Well, so I do. I hope it's not that kind of green. Because we're all going to die then. So arsenic, though, makes a wonderful, bright, vibrant green. Now, they're not using straight arsenic. They're using this compound that's arsenic adjacent. And so it was once arsenic, and there's some things happened from the chemist, and a little alchemy thrown in there because we're not sure about the science thing. We're still using leeches and,
And extra chemicals to help set the dye.
Right. And so that's all seeming very good. But once the dye either warms up and is exposed to some moisture, or once the real strong damp sets in, and I don't know places like England, it's never damp there.
No!
Then this colour starts to off-gas, and the off-gassing is arsenic gas. So it goes through a different chemical process at that point. It's just like, we were arsenic adjacent, now we are arsenic. Hello.
The die has been cast.
Oh my. It was so good.
We've sent all those lasses in those green dresses out in the middle of World War I across the enemy lines.
Yeah, let's try the arsenic gas dress rather than the mustard gas. It should be totally effective. Now show them your ankles!
They'll be shocked and they will just intake
they'll take a big breath and then they'll die.
And they'll gasp from shock, and then they'll be gasping from
arsenic gas. Good morning, delightful picture. You look gorgeous.
Thank you.
Love it. I always love this one. It's beautiful. So yes, there were sort of ripe conditions everywhere, because the other thing is people were using
Ripe?
this dye. Oh, it's all going to be good. Yeah. But no, there are ideal conditions because people like to wear this bright green in their gowns for going out to balls, in their headpieces, so especially...
You want to make a statement.
Well, you do, and you really want all of your accessories to match, so very popular in the mid-19th century, with these little flower crowns that you'd wear as if you were an angelic creature floating about in your unnaturally green gown through the throngs by candlelight, and so the leaves were delicately dusted with more of the Schloss green in a powder form. So the powder form, of course, aerosolizes.
Oh, you share.
Yes. Very, so well. It just goes everywhere. It's like, oh, let me into your lungs. Every time you breathe, be really great. I'm here for you. You will die.
And settle upon your skin. You can absorb it.
Right, no. And then you'll perspire, and I will off-gas some more, and I'll poison your mates right there, and that gentleman you were also hoping to, woo. So these people were starting to break out in rashes, and hives, and eczema, and illness from this arsenic that was off-gassing.
A rash of deaths?
A rash of deaths.
I'm not going to apologize because you will just have to get used to it.
I'm very excited. I feel like this panel's going to take on an entirely different tone than I expected.
Let's keep death upbeat, people.
We're the Pollyannas of death. So, oh my God, where was I? So they were off-gassing, but also they were using this green in things like, I don't know, the wallpaper in nurseries, the carpets in nurseries, the paint on children's toys, and even in the dyes you used to make your food green to match your dress, to match your wallpaper. So this one hostess was very wealthy, big time on the scene in London. She's like, darling,
Yes.
I thought it would be very great as if our whole theme for this week's fete was Paris green.
Of course, it is all the rage. Why, you're brilliant!
It will definitely help you win the election in Parliament.
Oh, yes.
So, and they had this party, and they painted all the candies and the pastries and everything with the green, and people took them home to their children, as one does, and the children died from the green food colouring.
As children do.
As children do when you feed them arsenic in candy form. It's true. And then
How would you resist in that form?
Oh my gosh, well, we're back to the 20% survival rate of childhood. If the measles don't get you, the arsenic will.
Or the chemicals they added to your milk.
Oh, that was not milk anymore. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't milk. So, the other thing that was happening, especially with the young and the elderly, was that because the wallpapers were infused with this dye in their nurseries, when they would start getting a little bit ill, they would be confined to nursery whilst they were getting better.
Yes.
And
they usually kept the window shut.
yes.
If you were
Yes.
being, kept in. Just to keep out the bad humors.
Yeah, so eventually they did discover that it was the off-gassing from the compound into arsenic. And the green dye, the Paris green, the Schloss green, began to fall out of favour. But not before this little flower girl, she's sort of like the little match girl, there's no...
Oh, that's a totally different form of death.
Yeah, there's no story about her. So this flower girl out of Paris, who had been dusting the leaves of all these crowns, started turning green herself. So her fingernails turned green, her skin got a green hue. She complained. Her manager was, sort of not about things like unionising and good working conditions. So he was getting 5 pence a day That's a good deal and porridge. No complaints. Get back to work. So the complaint started 6 months earlier than her eventual death, and by the time she died, her eyes had turned green, the whites of her eyes, and she started frothing green out of the mouth, went into convulsions, and passed away. And at the end, the newspapers were so delighted to report that she said her last words were, "All I see is green." So this set off a big investigation and an uproar about this Paris green dye. All of the debutantes and the fine ladies who were wearing the dresses were attacked and ridiculed for being, the source of death of these poor flower girls and these women making the fabrics. Do you think they ever complained about the chemist or the people who invented the dye? No, they did not. But those fellows continued to make a profit by turning their dye into rat poison. And so I believe even today you can find the same compound in rat poison. And dressmakers, florists, couturiers, especially in France, still consider green to be bad luck because of the death. They may not remember the details, but that sort of urban legend of the death by green lives on.
So how many died dyeing your dress? I had 16 for mine.
It's a good question, isn't it? And those women actually did suffer ill consequences from wearing those dyes that they were not aware came from the clothing. They really were breaking out in hives, getting ill themselves, because they were not facing the same magnitude of exposure. They didn't usually die, but they got quite ill.
And it was reoccurring illness. They might start to feel a little better, but then it would just keep coming back.
Oh yes, they'd be in their night clothes, hanging out in bed for a few days, and then, I'm feeling better. Let's get that dress on.
You think they got time off?
Well, if they were upper class.
Yes.
Or, as long as they weren't children being sent to nursery, right? Because then it's never ending. So
It makes me wonder about Scarlett O'Hara in the green dress.
Actually, I never thought about that, but yes. Oh, those green curtains were actually exactly the right shade to be in that family, that vibrant deep green. And so historically, they probably would have been full of Paris green to murder the people on old Terra. So that place was cursed. That's good.
Terror instead of terror.
But the hunger for vibrant colours did not end with the Paris green incident. People still really wanted so much colour. It was a new era, it was a new age of adventure and exploration. In Europe, they were certain that science could solve many of these issues. But also in the course of adventure, people were going to places with things called mosquitoes and malaria. There are very few things to do for malaria except quinine. So, ye old gin and tonic is your perfect malaria sort of avoidance technique.
Gin hour.
Anti-malaria hour. So, but the thing is, the British Empire only had one source of quinine, and that was from Central America. So it was very dear, it was hard to get, and other places that had not colonized that area and pillaged the resources really had a hard time, because in imperialism you need to be first on the scene.
Yes, well, it's all about the flag. Who gets their flag there first?
Who's going to steal these resources? It's so hard. But it's very difficult to get a good price on resources that your adversaries are stealing. So a young chemist in England, knowing that it was so hard to procure quinine, knew that there would be a wonderful market for a synthetic quinine. And so he started experimenting with synthesizing quinine in his home laboratory, which I'm certain was completely safe.
Oh yeah.
I'm certain that he used all manner of precautions and had a really good ventilation system
Of course.
and good chemical disposal practices. Because, no, probably not. So, his name was William Perkins, and he was failing a lot at the synthetic quinine. Just failure after failure. Poor Mr. Perkins.
Yes. But did he not have a success?
He did have a success.
What was that success, madam?
One day, whilst he thought he had failed terribly, his tube turned an ungodly tarish black. And he was feeling like he'd lost his glass works as well as the chemicals. So he went in to try and clean out the tube, and as he put his rag in there to clean it out, his rag came out this sort of intense mauve, purpley mauve shade. Pulls it out, he's like, what happened? It was black in the tube, and now it's this colour? How did that happen? And then he tried to clean the rag off with some alcohol spirits, and the colour just went everywhere, and it set, and he could not get it out of the rag. And that's when he realised
I've created a dye.
he had made the first synthetic dye, which was mauvine. And he, being actually quite a bright young fellow, unlike, many people in science I know today who are more altruistic and not looking for profit, his first thought was, I could sell this to so many people and make so You're going to murder me.
Well, at least you know where it's coming from.
Sorry, not sorry.
I love you. So good. So Mr. Perkins actually knew fairly quickly that he was going to market this and that it would be hugely profitable because people had this hunger for bright colours, and because achieving colours like this is almost impossible with dyeing methods from the past, using only flat-based dyes. So he proceeded to unleash mauvine, as it was called, on the world. It took off like a roaring success.
The colour was everywhere in varying shades of intensity.
Absolutely, it was really popular. You can still see gowns made out of mauvine fabric in museums. And it unleashed a whole series of aniline dyes, which were synthesized with some familiar sounding arsenic adjacent chemicals.
Again.
For instance, one very fine arsenite, which when it undergoes quite similar chemical transformations as we saw with the Schloss cream, it does something rather similar of, off-gassing, but also as you perspire and heat up, it will cross your skin barrier into your bloodstream. So exciting! It's such a good
An
time.
infusion of morphine.
An infusion of mauvine. So there was this outbreak, if you will, of like mauvine measles, where mostly women wearing these mauvine gowns would break out into a rash wherever the gown touched them of these measles that were very mauve in shade. And, there'd be some ulcerations and other things would happen, nausea, just sort of this list of symptoms went on and on. Of course, again, the people manufacturing were the ones who faced the worst consequences. So those...
Well, it was a chemical byproduct that they stumbled upon that has a certain property.
Yeah, no, part of the beauty of this was that the chemical they used as the base of aniline was a byproduct from the coal manufacture process. So they were like, oh, we've got this terrible dross, this coal tar we can't do anything with. Let's turn it into dye. Should be fine.
Make money on both ends.
What? It's
It's brilliant.
the perfect Victorian principle.
Exactly.
All
We're
the money,
recycling.
none of the research. So,
Moral qualms in there.
oh no, none. So yes, these outbreaks of mobbing measles, and so they sort of go through like the bright shades of the problem. And it wasn't every dye either, because people used different levels of practice, and so some of the fabrics and dyes would be produced in a better manner, and so they'd be less likely to off-gas, they'd be more settled. So you never knew what you were going to get. Money certainly did help, you got what you paid for in some circumstances, but not everyone was, I would say, on the up and up, as it were, with what they were marketing.
True. I mean, but that was pretty much with all Victorian products of the age.
Yeah.
It's like, the more you paid, the more likely you were to get. However, if you were trying to get something so incredibly vibrant, and the demand is so high,
Absolutely.
one might be tempted to cut a few corners.
I mean, it's
Or a
possible.
lot.
All the corners. More like a round
Circle.
A circle. Like a trapper's eggs. Anyway, so they would put to bed one fabric issue only to have another pop up, as it were. So the mobbing measles sort of passes, and then rumours of how black stockings are murdering people arises. Well, black is a very difficult dye to colour to achieve.
To get a true black. I mean,
Absolutely.
most of it had been in grays or little, but to get like a true vibrant black,
Deep black.
dense.
Especially one
thick.
that will not fade quickly or run. Very hard.
Mhm.
And so the synthetic dyes were a brilliant opportunity to
Get the saturated color.
get a good black. Unfortunately, can you guess what one of the principal ingredients were in that black dye? Yes, arsenic. And so, as one wears
Black death.
black stockings, of course, one is putting them into leather shoes, and they are going to heat up, and you're going to perspire, and the black is going to, you know.
No. Ladies don't perspire. We glisten. We glow.
Mostly they were talking about working men dyes from the stockings, although there were certain ladies of the working persuasion who also wore black stockings.
Black was desirable because it didn't show the dirt. The oppressive dirt everywhere.
And dirt was the least of your worries when you went on the street. So the black stockings were at first ridiculed as any sort of concern. Newspaper articles took this information as really, people are not dying from these. This doctor who's writing to us is clearly absurd. But more and more cases were reported. There was an outpouring of reports to the journals about, ulcerations and rashes and losing toes and illness. And so investigations were finally made. And that is when outside chemists who had not been selling the dyes discovered the issue with the arsenic. So this raised a huge ruckus in England, but also in parts of Europe, about the availability of arsenic and how easy it was to acquire. All you had to do was run down to the chemist and say, I'd like some arsenic, please. And the chemist would say, here you go.
Would you like that in
How
blue
much?
form?
How much would you like?
Powdered? Liquid?
Yeah. Do you want me to paint your house with it? Get someone. So arsenic was very easy to come by for a household. People would use it for things like rat poison. And Um,
It's actually used in medicine.
it was, I'll definitely put some pep in your step or something. And they use many lovely things in their medication. So this
I'm
arsenic.
noticing a common thread.
Yeah.
You think arsenic might be the problem?
Right. I don't know. I feel like I'm jumping the gun, blaming innocent old arsenic.
No, it can't be that.
I'm here to blame the ladies for just wearing green. Let's just blame them.
Yes.
Can't be the dye. So, so they investigated and they found that in these aniline dyes, the same arsenite was present. It was part of the chemical reaction with the coal tar. And so there was a sudden, excitement in the parliament and other governing bodies to put a kibosh on the widespread use of arsenic and to put some restrictions in place. However, the thing they did not restrict is how arsenic was used in any chemical industrial processes. So there continued to be arsenic death from fabric and arsenic illness from fabric for years to come.
As a matter of fact, now we had pretty much called it arsenic green as opposed to Paris green.
It's true.
It has been redubbed.
Yes, that's true. That is generally what we call it. Or at least we do.
Yeah.
So, I don't think that's common.
I think it's catching on.
It's catching on. We're about that. TM. So, but dyeing of dye was not the only way to dye the fabric.
No, there was another very, very common way.
Involved flame and explosions. So, in the past, it may surprise you to note that they were not wearing polyester and there wasn't flame retardant fabrics. It was all natural fibers.
Well, gee, I'm awfully glad my fabric isn't going to melt.
Well, I prefer not to be melted into my garments, but we will talk about someone who was. But the thing is that these fabrics will burn, cottons, the linens will burn fairly quickly. Now, if it's limp and close to your body, or curtains, and you can put it down, you can put it out pretty quickly. But if your highly flammable fabrics have a sort of flue built into them, a chimney system developed into the garments, then it sort of feeds them quickly with all this oxygen that's just sitting around, waiting to explode into a Roman candle of haberdashery and high fashion.
Yes.
So hoop skirts were actually the very best way to feed a fire, because you just were walking around in your very own chimney, or chimney, as we say out here. Yeah, nice little pot-bellied stove from the waist down.
And you're the flue.
And you're the flue. And these women were corseted, and they were wearing fairly heavy garments, and you can't really see your feet. You can feel them, but you can't see them. You just know that hoop edge is out there somewhere. And when you run into people, it's like bumper cars in fashion. Oh, hello. Hello. Oh,
pinball when you hit the bumpers.
Okay.
Bing, 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 bing.
So that's how you can tell your spatial awareness, just running into each other. But that did mean you would not necessarily notice if you walked into the fireplace. And there was so much life there, candles, lanterns, cooking. A spark could just fall onto your gown, and that would be enough, with that flue inside, that chimney built into your garment, to set the whole thing alight. And even earlier, when they were wearing many, many petticoats, and not with the crinoline that created the flue, the heaviness of the petticoats, the froth of the petticoats, still built in a fair amount of air, but for those, it was just so many layers and so much weight, it was harder to move someone to get them put out if they caught on fire. But once we get into that crinoline, we really do have this chimney effect, and people would go up like Roman candles. They would just burn from head to toe so quickly, and it would spread. As we discussed last night, you have 3 debutantes in a row, one catches fire, they're all gone. 3 fewer debutantes to marry off. So there were some changes made, you know, the ultimate invention of the elliptical hoop and the bustle cage.
And as it progressed to gaslight, there were, you still had open flame, but it was usually a little more controlled. But that was later in the century, as
Also
the hoops were
elevated.
already being elongated. As that was happening, the gaslight was becoming more prevalent.
Yes.
But when they were really big,
It was just
not
fire
much
everywhere. So, and you know, one of the best flame retardants you could have at the time was to be wearing wool. So the wool, the lanolin in the wool would keep it from catching flame.
It would smolder more,
Right.
but it wouldn't like burst into flame. And depending on what they're using to like clean or starch the fabrics, because a raw cotton like in a t-shirt is gonna burn a little bit. It will like just catch fire. But depending on what you have, cleaned it with, or
Dyed it
with.
The way you starched it, usually with sort of like homemade starch from tubers. So it's plant starch in the garments, but
it would, go up nice and bright.
and there were many women who died in this way, tragically. It was mostly an issue for women, although sometimes their husbands, the men in their lives, would catch a light trying to put them out. And so you'd have, a couple or a family have several losses. But again, 20% survival rate, so people are sort of like, well, that's just how you roll here, It's either poison or fire.
Yes.
Or cholera.
But now there are other ways of inducing fire in fabric.
Well, you talked about the gas lights, and it's true, for the average person, the gas light was up high, and you were unlikely to walk into it with your dresses. But if you were a ballerina, or a theatrical, the live light, the gas light was at foot level.
Yes.
It was sometimes at waist level. It was all over the stage. It was like, let's put some open flame out there, should be good.
What could go wrong, right?
That'll keep you on your toes.
Oh yeah, especially for the ballerinas,
Yes.
who were wearing, of course, these very diaphanous tutus that were created out of a cotton or silk net that was treated with chemicals to make it stiffer and fluffier, which is a technical term.
Yes.
And brighter, so optically brighter.
Yes, and give that little bit of air, almost look like it's
Floating.
Exactly.
So the thing is, though, this chemical they use to treat the cotton and silk is highly flammable, and it makes those fabrics infinitely more flammable. To the point where you just have to get a little bit, close to the flame, and the heat could be enough to induce flames. But if you actually get too close to the limelight, idiom, then you are actually going to catch a light. And ballerinas were going up in flame, right and left. So there were discussions, concerns, safety precautions were bandied about.
Do you know
Such
how
a
long
bright
it takes
career.
to train a proper ballerina?
That's just,
You
it
know-
takes so long, and they're so high strung, and they're always on their toes, and it's a burden on society.
It's tiresome to have to retrain, when we just had a perfectly good one.
Right, she was perfectly fine. She did her job.
She was adequate.
So there's this very famous ballerina who was quite popular from Paris, who announced to the world that she would prefer to die than wear the dingy new tutus that were being made with chemicals that were flame retardant. And so there was an actual outcry, there was an attempt to make these tutus safer, and many of the finest ballerinas, they wanted that bright, light, floating experience. Their livelihoods were wrapped up in being seen as beautiful, being desirable on the stage, looking their best. They were often responsible for their own costumes. Same in the opera, you brought your own costumes with you. You paid
You often had your own dresser that you.
Right. So this one particular ballerina, though, she announced that on opening night, at minimum, she would always wear the traditional tutu, so that her opening could be as good as possible. And not only had she announced that she'd rather die than wear the old ones, but then she thought she'd tempt fate some more, and she'd do a ballet about a ballerina who's a moth who gets too close to the flame and dies in the flame.
Oh.
Yeah. No.
Art imitating life.
We all know how that goes in a D&D game. You make those statements, and you roll your 20-sided die, and you
Critical fail.
So, opening night, she's dancing beautifully, and she dances too close to the flame, and she goes up in flame. They do eventually manage to douse the flame, put it out. She does live for some time. 60% of her body burns. Her corset, because ballerinas danced in corsets with steel bones, her corset bones melted into her ribs.
Oh my goodness.
That was the heat of this flame. And she lived.
There's some magnesium in there.
Right. She lived for 9 months after that. 60% of her body with burn damage, and she died of the infection from, the burns, and probably from happiness. I would say that bones melted into the ribs is not really a very fun experience.
Yeah.
So she lives on in memory in, the ballerinas of the world, and also in some of the safety precautions we have today, with buckets of sand and things like that, and to stage not only with the curtains go up in flame, but you could lose your ballerina, so it's very good to have, your flame blanket and all of these different things to try put people
To mitigate
mitigate.
the possibility.
Yeah, or at least maybe just 10%, not the full 60. So there's another way.
They want to burn bright as a star, but not burn.
Right. Oh, and another thing about this chemical that was used to make the tutus bright and airy, it is now used in fire starters for your campfires. So it's still around.
Magnesium.
Yeah, you just use it to actually set fires on purpose now. Pretty good. So Paris
It burns
green,
really hot and really fast.
right? So Paris green became actual rat poison. Aniline dyes, and that chemistry is the basis for how we invent mustard gas. It's a good time. And the tutu chemical turns into actual fire starters.
Yes.
So good. So far.
Silver linings.
Silver linings.
Then silver phosphate is a completely different matter than
Oh, yeah, good times. More
Oh,
death!
death!
So Temperance,
Yes.
there is yet another way by which one might die in fiery death.
Oh,
full
yes.
passion.
There was a new invention called celluloid.
Oh, yes.
Oh, this fantastic plastic that can be made into so many things, especially accoutrements.
It was the first plastic,
It
wasn't
really
it?
was. I believe it was invented by an American gentleman. However, I believe it was a British gentleman who took it and sort of ran with it.
Sort of an Edison
Or
Tesla sort of
I might have that
experience.
backwards. I'll have to research. But they discovered that by making this plastic celluloid, it can be formed into and look just like ivory, which of course was exceedingly expensive. But you could manipulate it and paint it or treat it, add a little dye. You can even make it look like jade, which is even harder to get in larger quantities. So the hair combs and pendants and earrings and cue balls
Yes.
for billiards.
Yes, and snooker.
Yes. So anything that they were making out of ivory,
Cuffs as well.
but they found that they could also make it into almost like a plastic fabric. And this was hugely popular with the gentlemen, especially clerks and in offices, because they weren't allowed to have really scratch paper, because paper was expensive. It was, you had to mill and do all this stuff. So they weren't given a whole lot of scratch paper to make calculations and notes and stuff. So the clerks loved the celluloid cuffs, which could just be pinned with cufflink onto their shirts and their collars, so that they can, and they're pristine and white, and they can literally just be washed clean.
I mean, they're easier to wash too than the cotton and linen cuffs and collars, which could be also made, removable from your garment, but they require special laundering and starching and really special care. If you're a bachelor gentleman, of course you don't do your own laundry.
But celluloid cuffs and collars,
Right.
all they had to be was rinsed.
You didn't need the expense of a laundress.
You didn't have to hang dry them. They could just hang. You could just put them on the table and they'd be dry.
You didn't even need to marry anyone at
No.
that point.
So this created a whole new opportunity for them, and it gave them a whole lot more opportunity to die because celluloid is explosive. If it gets too hot,
It's true.
yes.
Not good.
no.
Celluloid became film, right? For still photography, but also for
moving pictures.
right. And of course, that was a very flammable experience, and the projectors would catch fire. They were rather warm. It's a bit that whole incandescent light bulb.
The bulb, yes.
Really wants to set things on fire.
Usually it was not too bad as long as you didn't have too many. You might just burn up that wall or melt or something. However, if it happens to be upon your person, and you're already wearing fabrics of rather flammable nature.
I don't know, like cotton and linen.
Oh yes, or treated with flammable dyes and other concoctions.
All those things.
Perhaps getting a little close to that flame might not be the best idea.
Right.
Bad life choice.
Right, it's right on your hands.
Yes.
It's right there.
I mean, so many cameo brooches, jewelry of all sorts.
Haircuts.
And they were sometimes even used in trims. There is actually a story of a woman who had some on her dress, and she got too close to a fire, and she too went up like a Roman candle in no time. And it's a lot like the magnesium and stuff they would use for. It goes up fast.
I mean, there was some knowledge that billiard balls would explode. Thank you. But they sort of took it in stride. Oh, we had a little explosion at the snooker table last night. It's fine.
It was a cracking good time.
They still thought it would be a really grand idea to turn that into things you could wear and all them. So what have we learned about the means of death in the 19th century?
Be careful of dye, you'll die, and be careful of flame, because you'll go up in flame.
Yeah, don't get too close to the fire. Bad idea. And washing things before you wear them takes on a whole new importance, right? Because you do want to maybe get some of those chemicals out.
Yes, and if you do, say you're going to a thrift shop or an antique store or something, and you see something that is antique, like a hair comb or a mirror or those type of things that looks like it's made out of ivory, just be extra careful because it could be celluloid.
Yeah, don't use it against the flint and steel for funsies. That's a bad plan.
Yes.
Maybe
so
don't see if you can melt it by the stove flame.
Yes, just be careful because they are still out there.
Also, if you actually were to get your hands on a garment, an antique garment from the 19th century, in a very bright colour, normally there'd be a lot of wear at this point and much of the off-gassing would be past. There would not necessarily be a high percentage of the arsenic left. I still wouldn't lick it.
No.
And I probably would wear gloves as a precaution. As I am not a chemist, I would actually take lots of precautions to make sure not to poison myself or others. Mask is not a bad idea. Steampunks have it right.
Yeah.
Protective eye gear, gloves.
Safety first.
Safety
Wear your
first.
goggles.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that needs to be like a steampunk poster. Mr. Springer. Needs to be a thing. So, any questions before we wrap up?
We have a few minutes left.
No, you've been so informative.
Oh, well, you know what, there is another thing,
Oh.
for death by, I mean, just in general. Be careful with your skirts on stairs, ladies.
Tripping.
Jangled, yes, can lead to many deaths. Stairs, dying on the stairs in Victorian England was very common, especially for the lower classes where the servant stairs tended to be much steeper.
Or if you were in a tenement and it was sort of like
Yes.
this narrow close that you had to get
And
through.
rises could be varying heights. They didn't have quite the standards today.
Again, we're back to that no standards and regulations thing. So,
Besides the flame and dying from dye, the leading cause of death was falling down the stairs, specifically for ladies because the skirts. And you're trying to climb an uneven stair or a very, very narrow stair with an unusually small tread would often lead to
And you
death.
probably can't see your feet.
Nope, you cannot see your feet because your skirts are too big.
But and your corsets.
Yes. That was a very bad recipe.
It was.
Yes, the footwear. Did it have good grip? Was there?
There was not usually traction for like they didn't have like the soles that most of the soles were pretty smooth.
Right, so it's a lot of leather soles. I think you might get sailors would have hemp
Yes.
sort of sandals and things. Most of the extant footwear I've seen does have a smooth leather sole. That said, I have not seen extant footwear for the lower classes and the working classes. Rubber was sort of discovered and used for industrial purposes starting in the 1850s, I think. So you would get rubberized fabrics, you would get rubber on things. So it's conceivable, I don't know again for certain, I can theorise however, that rubber could have become in use for things like treads on feet. You'd also get things like hobnails on working boots to give some traction. There are still some exemplars of footwear made in a similar fashion. I know to what was done historically in the 19th century and earlier. I know there's a place in, I think, northern England that still makes these sorts of working man's clogs that have a wooden sole and hobnails, and you could probably murder someone if you dropped one of these on their heads. They're very fierce.
But a housemaid would not be wearing something like that
No.
because of course she would need to be quiet.
And also not mar the floors. Yes, hobnails will do quite the job on your floors, honestly.
Yeah.
Don't dance in those. So the answer is, I think most of the shoes of ladies of the bourgeoisie and the upper classes
Would have been smooth.
no.
I mean, what initially they might have like probably some type of hatching, but those would be worn down very quickly as you wear them.
I have a pair of like sort of walking boots that are based on a 19th century design, essentially. Have sort of a roughed leather sole, almost suede but not quite. So it's less thick, but I don't really find in a situation where the grass is damp and I'm hiking through the woods that they actually give me any sort of traction. I have definitely done the turtle whilst wearing those, for sure. So, but they give excellent ankle support for going down, let's say that.
And most of the lower classes would only have maybe one pair of shoes.
Right.
That's it.
So basically what you're saying is that the Victorian obsession with death, the photography and all that other stuff, there's a reason for it.
Oh yes.
Because it was so common.
There were so many ways to die. You knew people were going to die left, right and centre. There was so much disease, warfare. If you were a person working in manufacturing, your life expectancy was going to be much lower. And the incidence of maiming from which you have to try and recover. And, poverty was a killer too, right? Because, the
malnutrition,
rickets, yeah, and there was no sort of, the prevailing theory was that if you were poor, you had a moral failing, so you deserved to be poor. So there wasn't like really good programs in place to help people with starving children. It was just like, well, I mean, if you were only a better human, you would have food. So yeah, it was death everywhere.
Yes, it was constantly in their food as well. The additives that they would do to their food. Milk was mostly chalk.
If you were lucky.
Yes, and there was this idea that the whiter your bread, the better it was for you. Then because it was only the upper class could afford white bread. What is this? It's like, so as that idea spread, they would add more and more, basically plaster to the because they would take the flour and they would cut it with plaster so that it would just make it whiter.
And it would give it quite the crumb.
People were starving to death eating bread because there was practically no nutritional value in it.
Plaster is really just not high in nutrients.
No, and the minerals and stuff would actually cause other internal problems because their body couldn't process it or expel it as much. So
the truth is, we could spend all day talking about the very many gory ways you could die in the 19th century.
Victorian home was laden with lots of booby traps.
So much death. So yes, they were indeed obsessed because it was around every corner. So yeah.
Ever present.
Unfortunately, it is time.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I do have some cards up here. This is my own personal calling card, if you'd like. It has all of my information. And one of the nice things about this is it has the website for my Patreon, where you can find my handout that goes with this panel that includes all of my bibliography for the research. So you don't have to subscribe. You can just go to the Patreon and download that for free if you are curious to learn more.
Where will you be next?
Next, I shall be at this event in San Diego, which is Gaslight Steampunk Expo at the end of September. I'm very excited to be there. Very sad you will not be there. I'm very happy Christina will be there.
Already in mourning.
Joseph will be there. Michelle will be there.
I was meaning for those of us here, where will you be next?
Oh, well, very next. Sorry, here. The next next time I should be here in Phoenix is at the Rosso.
At the con. This
At
evening.
11:30 on the terrace.
I don't know.
At 11:30 on the terrace.
I'll be in the terrace.
Complimentary
I'm
tour.
doing at 11:30, and then I'm doing a thing at 1. Is it here?
No.
No, it's in another room. 1.
That's also on the terrace.
All right, that's the terrace. Be back here at 9 tonight.
For Torrid Tales of Tea.
Yes. Thank you.
Another lovely jaunt through history.
Yes. Oh, we love our history. There will probably be
So
some
you'll have a
death
busy day today.
Yes, I will. Like, what do you mean there will be next? Everywhere. All day.
Where will your
talking to
entourage
a time
be able to
traveler.
follow you?
Right, thank you. Thank you, James. So, thank you all for joining us. Do come pick up cards. I also have a bookmark for TestCon, which is a convention in Tucson in November. I run the costuming track for TestCon, and I will also be doing some panels. So we'll another way to die when a friend stabs you in the neck.
That's okay, I still
This
love you.
side.
I know. Thank you. You would have seen me weeping on the floor if it was the other side.
Please always sit on this side of me today, so I don't accidentally stab you.
This is the last one I'm on with you, so.
Oh, that's so all right, good. So that's us. Thank you so much. Thank you, James. Thank you, CoKoCon, for letting us do this panel. And please do pick up the bibliography. It's really fun reads. So, cheers. We're gonna pack up.
You know, next year maybe we should do the morning panel.
We should do the morning panel.
Yes.
We haven't done the morning
We haven't
panel in a
done that
while.
one.
It's good.
Thank you for listening to the Creative Play and Podcast Network. And feel free to enjoy our other shows, such as D&D Journey of the 5th Edition and Scion Ragnarok and Roll, a Scion hero to Ragnarok story. Thank you for listening.